Hello everyone. Again, I see there are a lot of people who are watching us from different states, and I think it's time to start. And I think that other people will join and will also start to communicating with us. All right. Team, you attend all our classes. That is so great. What was your favorite part? All right, let's start. Today we keep talking about game development, and let me tell more about our school, Black Screen AI. This is a project of the IT school programming in Silicon Valley for English-speaking students. It was founded in 2016 in California, and our instructors and assistants work in companies in the USA, Canada, and Europe. Programs are developed considering the requirements and processes of IT corporations and startups. Students undergo internships on commercial projects. We help students to reach employment, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. So, as I said, our school was founded in 2016. You see a lot of pictures of our meetings with all our students and teachers in real life, not only online. You can also find a lot of our reviews on our YouTube channel from our graduates, from our students, and that is where our graduates have been hired by. You see a list of very famous companies on the screen, and that is actually where our students usually work after our graduation. And today is the fourth day of our free live classes. Today we're going to talk about preparing your first job as a game dev. I want to see to take a look for our chat. Wait a minute. Okay. Yesterday finally got a little something. That's really good. All right. And tomorrow will be our last day of our free live classes. So don't miss it. It will be also the same time. And we'll talk more about create a horror game. I think that is pretty exciting. All right. And let me talk at the beginning, let me talk you more about our game dev Unity, about our beginners course, and why you need to choose game dev in Black Screen IT school. It's 100% live classes, not records, like for example tonight. A lot of practice, so you will get a project and you will be working on this project during your studying with us. And as you already know, we have really like the best instructors, and all of them they have relevant experience, so they don't just teach, they are practicing all the time, and they work as game dev in IT companies in USA. And as a result, in our school, you will get a strong command of C++ and its basic constructs, conditional operators, loops, and functions, understanding of the principles of game programming, and creating your own games on Unity using the C++ programming language, the ability to create and customize graphical interface elements, buttons, input fields, and lab. All right, yeah, I see the chat. All right, and as a result, you will get user input processing skills and display of results on the screen, understanding the principles of code organization and structuring, as well as the methodology of developing software projects. And Unity 3D is one of the most used game engines in the world. It's also used to create virtual reality. So you will bring your first 2D or 3D game to life and make it playable across multiple devices. Shape immersive worlds by designing interactive scenes and dynamic environments. Deepen your understanding of game elements from 2D, 3D objects to shaders and their intricate properties. Harness the power of the game engine, leveraging key components to influence object behavior, and master time control using time-based functions to create smooth and engaging gameplay. Also, you will breathe life into your game objects with custom behavioral scripts, empower player actions, and track their in-game journey. Craft an intuitive GUI tailored to user preferences. Fine-tune physics interactions to create a realistic or stylized game experience. Launch your game to the world by publishing it on any game hosting platform. So, and the course, it lasts for 16 weeks. All classes are live, like today, as I said before. It's not recorded, like you will get recorded lessons if you can't attend them, but you will have the opportunity to attend all the classes like in Zoom personally with professor and other students. And start of the course is on March 17th on Monday, and the cost of the course is $3,999. And you'll also have like a lot of students and people ask us about like if there is possible to pay like installments payments. So yes, we have services like Ethereum and or Klarna. So you can join today, for example, and your first payment will be like in a month. So you just can start right now and pay later. And there is you see our program of our course. There are 16 weeks, and there is a plan for each 2 weeks. So you can make a screen, or you can get the presentations that just contact with us, and we will share you all the full program of the course. But you will see like at the moment that you will create your own project, you will create like different games, you will start coding, like 3D creation, and a lot of fun activities. And we prepared an invitation discount to the GameDev course, especially for all attendees of today's lesson. So today's the price of the course is $3,299. So it will be until the end of our free lesson. So you still have a chance to join with really low and great price. So in order to do this, you can pay like making deposit $47. So you can lock this price, secure the supply price in your spot by making a deposit for like $47 today. Let me check the chat. So I want to see if you have any questions at the moment. All right, I didn't see the questions. If somebody just joined, tell us more about yourself. Where are you from? What is the state from? Where you located? And Tim already said that his Unity doesn't work. I think that there is a good question to our professor today. So let me introduce our instructor for today. It's Jonathan Hopkinson. So Jonathan in programming for 30 years. Can you imagine this? And programming on Unity since 1220. 2012, sorry. And game dev Unity course for beginners, instructor at Black Screen IT School. Okay, Jonathan, I think that it's time for you
Oh yeah.
to
Okay.
tell us more
You.
about yourself.
All right. Sure. Yeah.
Yes.
Definitely jump in that.
Uh,
Just real quick, Tim, as far as your Unity not working, I'd suggest if you have the videos or a link to the videos from yesterday, there's the steps involved in installing that. It's very hard to, debug in a setting like this, but I just go through those steps, like, and hopefully that will make it work. You know, we'll see. All right, so a little bit about me, real quick, in case those of you are new and you weren't here in the other courses. So I've been programming for 30 years, approximately. Well, it will be 30 years next month, actually. So I started in March of 1995, and I've done many different games, many different companies, many different projects. I started my career doing like educational kind of kids games, like little activity centers on CD-ROMs. And of course, we moved into, I did Game Boy Color games, I did Nintendo DS games, and then eventually moved into mobile and Unity and all that stuff. So that's kind of, where my background's been. And tonight we're going to talk about, well, tonight for me, I don't know where you are, but it's night for me, but we're going to talk about interview and interview questions and how to prepare for an interview. So, what I'd like to start off with is just how I got my first job. Now, granted, 30 years ago, the industry was very different than it is today. But basically, my story is I was a hobby programmer, meaning I just programmed for fun as a teen and just did whatever I could from whatever books I could get my hands on. Back then, it was books. This was, again, 30 years ago. There wasn't internet. And so I was a hobby programmer and I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed doing simple little things. And it turned out, I also had an older brother who was a programmer as well. And well, my first job was literally he was at a smaller company and they needed extra work. And he literally told him, hey, he could program. And basically, that's how I got my first job was just knowing the right person at the right time. But it was nice because that company was a smaller company and they were able to teach me a lot of things that, I couldn't learn because programs like this one didn't exist back then. It was a very different time. And as it says here, I didn't really realize there was money in it because the industry was so different 30 years ago. I mean, we're talking, pre-internet, pre-webinars, pre-Zoom, pre all that stuff. So it was very different. So that's how I got my foot in the door. But once I was in the door, you start learning and you start moving forward. So anyway, questions about your background. When an interviewer is asking you about your background, oh, that's the other thing I wanted to say before we dive into this. Yes, I have been on both sides of this. I have interviewed people and I've also been interviewed, of course. And so I have a ton of experience about this. And if you have any questions about interviews specifically, you could go ahead and post them in the chat and I'll try to address them, and maybe if it's something I don't address right away, we might be getting to it down the line. So that's why if there's a question. But anyway, so diving into that. So your background. When an interviewer asks about your background, what they're really looking for is they're trying to see what motivates you to code. Like in other words, do you just think of coding as a job, or is it really a passion or a hobby? Because the thing is, from experience, like when I'm interviewing someone, I want to see like, I ask them about their background because I want to see what they think of programming. I want to see what they feel. I want to try to dive into this stuff to try to pull out something because I don't want to hire someone who's just going to be this 9 to 5 person, just shows up, does this thing, and leaves. I want to hire someone who really believes in this code and really likes it and is like it is trying to be their best. Just like if you were hiring someone to work on your house, you wouldn't want somebody who's just going to like show up at the last second and barely do the job and then leave. You want someone who's like, yeah, I've done, 50 toilets in the last, 3 weeks or something. You want someone like that, right? Something exciting. So that's kind of why they asked this. Okay, next slide, please. All right. So another thing they might ask you during an interview is they're going to ask you your favorite thing about a tool or like your least favorite thing about a tool. and in our case, our tool we're going to use is Unity. But if you're interviewing for whatever job, they're going to ask you about the specific tool they use. And the reason why they're going to ask you this is they want to pick your brain to see if you know the tool very well or if you don't know the tool very well. This was actually one of my favorite questions to ask people when I interviewed, because typically someone who's relatively new to Unity is excited because of what it can do, but someone who's been using Unity for a while will have certain complaints about it as well. There's different complaints I've heard over the years, but one of my favorite things to say, like if you're asked about Unity, always talk about how there's one code base and it supports multiple platforms, because that's a huge selling point. I know a lot of engines do nowadays, but Unity supports everything from mobile iOS all the way to, like we mentioned, VR things. It literally supports almost any device you can compile to. You can compile straight to Java. You can do all this stuff from Unity, and it really saves big companies time to do it. That's one of its huge selling points. And the least favorite thing, like me personally, I think they could have done a much better option in their search options for the library. Like in the library on a big project, you'll have thousands of assets and scripts. And if you remember from previous classes, you could see the library is sort of like the folder structure of your project in Unity. And the search options are there. You can do quick searches, but I usually add a plugin from Unity to do better searches, because like the searches that they have in the editor don't dive into your assets, and sometimes you want to see where a particular image is used inside your game, and you can't really dig it in with their tools. You can see the list of images, you can see their names, but you can't see where the references are. So I usually install a tool to do that, and that's one thing I always complain about. That's something that they should put in, but they haven't. But again, know your tool, whatever your tool is. If it's Unity, whatever you're applying for, know that tool really well. So if you get these types of questions, you can sound smart in your answer and sound like you know what you're doing. Because again, the point of it is, do you know this tool? If we hire you, are you going to need a whole bunch of hand holding, or can you just dive right into something? Because those are really important things in an interview. All right, next slide, please. And I was going to say too, what we're giving you tonight, just so you know real quick, this is kind of an overview of what the course is going to be. Like in the course, when we talk about resumes and interviews, there's going to be much more in depth on all this stuff. But tonight I want to give you just a very generic overview of some of the things that we're going to be covering in this course. And we're going to, like I said, dive really, really deep. All right. Another thing is, like, they'll ask you, what was your biggest programming or coding triumph, or what was your biggest defeat? And again, this is kind of, it's trying to pull out your past. And like what I like to do is when asked a question like this, I like to try to steer it towards like trying to sell yourself. Because remember, whenever you do any interviews, you're always trying to sell yourself. You're the product and they're the or they're the customer, and you're trying to sell yourself to them, not in a strange way, but in a job type way. And when we talk about defeats, one of my favorite stories to tell is I was working at a company called Age of Learning, which is the makers of ABC Mouse, if you've seen their commercials or seen their products. And we were working on this relatively new app called My Math Academy. Anyway, we always push stuff out on Thursday nights, because you don't want to push anything out on a Friday because you might get stuck really late fixing it, right? So you don't want to do that. So on a Thursday night, we're getting ready to push stuff out, and it's about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, which is probably about normal time when we push stuff out, because you don't want to do it at the end of the day, but you want to have enough time, and at this point we had a small team there dedicated for the rollout. It was me, it was my supervisor, who was like, I was the senior Unity engineer, and he was the, principal engineer, my supervisor. And then we had a couple QA people. Well, we went ahead and back then, we had like in most, this was a online game. You know, it had a bunch of stuff online, assets and all that. And so we had basically we had the three environments, what we call our dev environment. I got to give you the background story, otherwise the story won't make sense. So the dev environment was what we used when we developed. So it was local servers. It wasn't anything on the internet. It was just stuff you could mess with locally. That was what we called dev. Our staging environment was basically our backup to live, but it was when we pushed stuff, we'd push it all to staging, we'd run all our tests. When all the tests and everything passed staging, then we would push staging to live, and live was the platform that was out to all the world. But there was one little caveat, which was when we pushed from staging to live, we would basically test, like we had, mirrors of servers and all this stuff. So once we pushed the live the first time, it was only local to the area around the office. And then when it worked there on live, we had pushed it out and it would copy on all the mirrored servers across the area, the world, basically, for that particular product. So anyway, so this story goes that, we're up there, we're running all our tests on stage and everything's looking awesome, right? And so, we passed, QA passed it, all the automated tests, everything worked. So we're like, my supervisor said, okay, we're good, let's press the button. So we press the button, staging, like I said, it pushes out to live for just our region right there around the office. And all of a sudden, QA is getting all these errors. And they're like, uh-oh, what is going on? Well, of course, me and my supervisor are the only devs there, so we're panicky and starting to dig through all the logs and trying to figure out what happened. And to make a long story short, probably around 9 o'clock at night or so, because live was broken, we had to stay. I actually realized that one of the scripts that was run to push staging to live, which was written a few years ago by somebody who wasn't at the company, basically errored silently. And what ended up happening is it trashed what they call the CDN, which stands for Content Delivery Network, which is essentially all the servers that have the data on it. It essentially trashed the manifest file on that, which a manifest file is basically it's the it's the collections of all the assets for different versions of the game. So essentially what it did was it completely destroyed that asset table database kind of, and made it so that when the game was asking for a certain asset, the server would say that asset doesn't exist, which would make the game crash. Now, see, I tell you that story to give you an example. Like, notice how I'm using certain buzzwords like CDN and staging and dev. Like, I'm telling you guys so you would understand what the story is. But if I'm in an interview, like anyone who does servers would use these type of words. Like, if you can find buzzwords and use buzzwords when you're telling your story, like buzzwords, and use them intelligently. You don't just throw words out there. Like if I said Java, blah, 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 HTML, like those are buzzwords, but they're not in the right context. If you use buzzwords in the right context, you connect with your interviewer, and you make them understand that you know what's going on and you understand a few things. Now, I'm not a server programmer, so I don't know all those things about the server side stuff. I'm a client side programmer, but I knew enough to know the problem, saying, oh, this is broken on this because we can't access our assets. You see, there's certain things. We did have a server guy there too, and he helped us with some of the logs, but that's a whole other story. And then, if you have a triumph, like if you have a personal project or something really good, something that you thought was excellent, share that. Like probably what I think my best triumph one, again, another story just for the sake of example, my best triumph was we were making a game. I shared it yesterday, the game called Panda Pop, which is probably the most popular game that I touched. When we were early on in the process, it's a bubble shooter game, just for you guys who didn't see it yesterday. It's a bubble shooter game where you shoot the bubbles, it pops, blah, blah, blah. You solve the level. I'm sure you guys played 100 games like that. You might have played Panda Pop. Well, early on, we were a small studio doing it for a bigger studio. And me and my supervisor at that time were having a discussion about level editors, right? And he wanted to make two code bases, one for the level editor and one for the actual game. Early on in the discussions, like he kept pushing that. And in one of the meetings, I pulled him aside, said, hey, look, Unity is an awesome, powerful tool. And Unity has the ability that you can choose, like when you have a giant project, you can choose which scenes and which pieces of code go into what thing when you compile. And I told him, like, why don't we build the level editor and the real game directly in the same application, and we can make the level editors run Unity while they're doing it. And at first he thought I was crazy, but then I was explaining the benefits. I was saying when we do this, one is when we have the level editors run or make a level, they'd be playing in the actual real game engine that's going to be shipped out. So we don't have to worry about, discrepancies between the actual game engine and the level editor game engine. He's like, yeah, okay, I got that. I said, furthermore, when they're running Unity, we can run stuff behind the scenes. We could, take their level, we could back it up, we can, put it in, like we can do whatever we want with it because we have the Unity running, and we could make, HTML calls or whatever we need to do to, track whatever we need to track. And he's like, oh yeah, that's a good point, because sometimes, you have things like, a certain level has to be a certain, difficulty, and that level editor is working towards that. And you can say this level's too easy, this level's too hard, and you can give them feedback like that. But it was really cool because at the end of the day, he ended up with my idea because it was a good idea and it saved us a lot of potential headaches. And one of the coolest things is the level editors. I had one of them, our senior level editor, was like really awesome at level editing. What he used to do is when we had bugs in the game, he would make me a specific level that was show the bug, and like basically, so all I'd have to do is shoot the bubble in one exact spot, and he'd even show me exactly where, and the bug would repeat. So it really helped us save tons of times with debugging, with level editing, with all sorts of stuff, with testing, and in the long run is a wonderful decision. So that's what I like to say one of my big triumphs was. Again, as I'm telling the story, I'm talking about level editors, and just I'm sharing with you that I know what I'm talking about. It's really good to take questions like this that are open-ended and really use it to sell yourself. The interviewers love that stuff, and then they can ask you questions about it, and the interview doesn't go quite as awkwardly. All right, let's jump to the next slide, please. All right, let's talk about this because this is probably, honestly, I mean, I have a ton of experience, but this is probably still the scariest part of interviews. Usually most companies have stages of interviews. The first one is usually just like a get to know you, sell yourself kind of thing, right? That's the first thing. Then they'll usually have a technical screening or a real time code exercise. Now, this is very scary because, most of us who are programmers, it's very hard to program on the spot. But from the interviewer side, another one in doing the interview, um, you need to kind of see what this person can do or how they think. So a coding exercise is a really, really good way to do it. Now, probably my most scary but yet favored example of this is when I was applying for a job through Microsoft. It was a contractor job, so it was a temporary time frame, but it was Microsoft Casual Games. And this was about, I think, 2, 3 years ago, right? And basically, when I went to the live coding exercise, the guy on the other end had me, open Unity, open up Visual Studio, all that, and he said, "Okay." He's like, "Now, what I want you to do is I want you to start, creating a function that would move two chess pieces from point A to point B, like you're playing a chess game, and you pick up your piece, your pawn, and you want to move it forward, right?" And what I did, which is sort of what I do in my head, but during the interview, I literally talked out loud while I was writing the code. Like in other words, because, basically, a exercise like this, it's not only to see if you're comfortable with the coding tools like we talked about, but it's also trying to see how you think. Because if you just stop for a minute and just go down the path with me of how would you make a a function that would move two chess pieces, right? Well, the first thing is you'd have to, if you have point A and point B, there's your parameters, right? You have like some XY position on the board, some XY position on the board. So you're moving something from 0, 0 to 1, 1 or whatever, right? So that's what I did. I laid that out first. Well, okay, you can kind of like in a case like this, unless they are asking you very, very specific things, you can sort of pseudocode it, which is what I did. I said, okay, well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to see, you know, I'm going to assume there's a function that's going to tell me, is there a piece at this point on the board? And he's like, oh yeah, that's good. That's good. So I said, okay, so I'm gonna, get information about what's at point A and get information about what's at point B. He's like, okay, good, good. And then as you go through it, as you talk through that coding exercise, the person on the other end, or she would be able to see how you think. So I'm thinking, okay, I have a function moving point A, point B. I need to see what's there. Okay, I need to see what's there. Next is I need to see, which way, am I moving diagonally? Am I moving forward? Am I left and right? Can the piece I have legally make that move? Because that's the check you have to say, right? You know, because if the piece can move, then great. If they can't move that way, then, I need to block them right away and say that's not a legal move, right? So I basically started talking through that function. And I mean, it took quite a while. I guess it was probably almost 10 minutes, and he sort of stopped me because, the interview was getting long at that point. And he's like, he actually told me, he's like, you know what? He's like, it was so nice of you to talk out loud and think about while you were coding. And he's like, that's actually a hard skill to do. And I believe that's probably why I got that particular job. Obviously I had a lot of experience and stuff, but, I really connected with that particular person who ended up being my supervisor when I actually got that job. So, the other thing with technical screenings is sometimes there might be another slide, but we'll just talk about it now. Sometimes they're very, very difficult. And the only thing that I could say is, just prepare your best. There are, I don't have the slides in front of me, but there are places if you do searching for programming test or something like that, you can see one. I know one of the websites, let's see. Oh, actually, I don't know. I don't think that website's up there. Never mind. But yeah, there's websites. If you type in coding tests, there are places that will give you sample coding exercises, and sometimes even time frames, like timed activities are the really hard ones. But as you get more and more in your career, you'll get more comfortable with doing those types of things. All right, let's jump to the next slide, please. All right. Oh, I love that picture. Yeah, The Office. Great picture. Great show too, by the way. All right, so a lot of times they'll ask you things like, why do you want to work here? Or what would benefit would you have? Or what can you offer? Or something along those lines about why you want to work at that company. Now, I encourage you to find out as much as you can about that company. Like when you apply for a role, you'll know their name, you'll know what your role is generally, but go to their website. Like, see, what they do. Download their games if they have games available, like on a Android or iOS app or something. Play their games. Have feedback about it, because what that does is it shows you that you really want this job. Like it shows them that you really want this job. Like when I got my job at TruePlay, TruePlay is a company that makes like, little games behind a like a paywall. Basically, I went on YouTube because like I didn't want to buy their product because I was interviewing for them, but I went on YouTube and I looked at some of their, games that they did. And it was kind of funny because like when I was interviewing there in my like tech interview, the Meet the Team interview, I think it was the third interview. Um, it was kind of funny because one of the guys asked me what my favorite game that TruePlay made was. And it just so happens that, I commented on one of the games. I think it was like David's Battles or something. And he was the programmer for that game. So, I mean, that was just random raw luck. But at the same time, in describing that game, it showed them that I was interested in what they were doing. And I did my research there. And like, you might not hit it on the head. Like maybe you might not get the actual person who made that game like I did that one time, but that really helps. It really does. It shows you that you're invested in their company as well. All right, next slide, please. Okay. When they ask you for questions, I want to strongly encourage you to have something to ask them. Excuse me. Now, this can this can go so many different ways. Um, I would strongly discourage you from asking the interviewer like HR related things, like, holidays or stuff like that, because stuff like that is going to come up anyway in some HR meeting you have with HR. But I don't think you should ask them. But if you can ask some things like maybe, just general things like their work family life balance or stuff like that, because this kind of like this open-ended question is good because it will show them that you're thinking about working there and you want to know more things. I also like using this question to sort of like and further enforce your experience. Like I love to ask them, it says right here, like the size of their teams. Like in other words, I've worked at many different places. Some teams have QA resources embedded directly on the teams, and some have shared QA resources that are for the whole company. I like to ask questions like that because, it shows that you have experience, and it also shows that, you're interested, and sometimes it can lead to them asking other questions. Like one place I was interviewing for, I didn't end up getting that job, but when I asked him this question about QA resources, he asked me, well, why do you ask that? And I simply told him, I said, well, I've worked at different places that have both things. And I said, well, the problem is if you have a QA resource like general team, sometimes other programming or, dev teams will all have deadlines at the same time. And depending on what the priority is of your project, you might not get those QA resources in the time you need them you know whereas if you have embedded QA people on your team, they're your resource as that team to control, and it's extremely helpful. And the other place I worked at, like we had embedded QA resources, but what we would do is we would trade QA resources to other teams at different times, because a lot of times, like when you're doing the standard, like 2 week sprints or 3 week sprints, which I believe we'll cover in a second what that means, but it's basically when you're planning your project and you're planning milestones and deadlines and all that. If you have embedded QA resources early on in a deadline, they like early on in a sprint, like early when the deadline's far away, they don't have much to do. But later on, when the deadline's close, they're going to have a ton of stuff to do. So what we found out at this bigger company is like if we loan our QA people back and forth, they'll stay busy and happy all the time, and they won't be just trying to look busy, which is what happens when you have embedded QA, as opposed to a big QA resource team. So that's something you could talk about again, just as a question. You can also, ask things like, different company culture things like, hey, do you guys ever like get everybody together? That's a big one for remote work. If you're into remote work, like some of the companies I've worked for, I've had some that never get everybody together, and I have some that do like once a year, like pull everybody together at least on the same Zoom meeting or something like that to have everybody just connect. Those are good questions. The culture thing, is good. Company culture, because companies will like you to ask that stuff because it shows interest. Again, like if they ask you, do you have any questions for us or for me? The interview asks you that and you say nothing, you kind of sound boring. You sound like you didn't really do your homework. All right. Next slide, please. Okay, interview tips. All right. Let me get a drink real quick. Okay. All right. Okay, so before the interview, you need to find out as much as you can about what type the interview is going to be or what the interview is going to flow like. Usually they'll tell you in the email, or when if a recruiter or whoever sets up the interview, they might say something like initial review. That's, the initial interview, I'm sorry, interview. That's always you trying to sell yourself, right? That's always them going over your background, going over your history to see if you're a good fit. And like we talked about, a technical screening, that's a pretty big one. A technical screening is going to be testing your knowledge, you know, that kind of stuff, right? And then, sometimes they have a meet the team interview. I've been on those before too, where basically they like you and they want to introduce you to your potential team to make sure your potential team likes you. And again, sometimes they'll ask you, general get to know you questions. Other times they might mess with you sometimes. Like I remember one of them I was asked like, some crazy question like, if you were a tree, what tree would you be and why? Just stuff like that. Like sometimes they'll ask you funny questions just to see what your source of, what your humor's like or how you respond to those sort of curveballs. Because again, that's a personality thing. Sometimes a team would want to know what your personality is like, you know. Okay. Another thing for tip for interview is when the interview on the other side is going to see how you present yourself, how you respond to those questions. Are you funny? Are you interesting? You know, are you whatever? Like, and again, they're going to want to ask you things to drive out those stories, like some of the stories I'm sharing, because they want to see that sort of stuff. They want to see if you're comfortable, talking. If it's a remote thing, are you comfortable on a Zoom meeting? Because maybe your job is going to have you presenting in front of some shareholders, and you can't be shy and intimidated or something like that. They're going to want to look for these types of things. You know, just be ready. Be ready with stories about your career, about your college, personal projects, whatever experience you have. Try to pull those stories in. Okay, next question or next slide. Sorry. Okay, some more tips. All right, here's a good one. You need to be honest about what you're good at, what you're bad at, and don't lie. Don't try to deceive because, everyone knows how nowadays world is, for a few bucks, anyone can get a whole lot of dirt on somebody, because all the public information, it's public records, it's all out there, your background, whether you have degrees, whether you have, criminal record, whatever, all that stuff's out there. So don't, you know, lie about it. And if they ask you about something, you can use something that you're bad at as a plus point. Like one example is like, you know, me personally, I've done a ton of 2D style iPhone games, but so my professional work, I don't have a whole lot of professional 3D work that's out there. I know how to do it. I've done some, but some of it is obsolete or some of it is no longer available. So I tell them that. I say, well, I've been doing 2D for the longest time lately because it's all been this kind of things. I know 3D, but I might be a little bit, slow at it, or I might have to relearn some things because it's been a few years. You could tell people those things. They like that kind of stuff. I mean, you could also like, you could do what one of my friends did. He would always like when they asked him something like that, he would wrap the bad and make it good. Like one of the funny stories he was telling me, he would say something like, they're like, what do you think your biggest flaw is? And he'd always answer something like tongue in cheek, like, well, my biggest flaw is sometimes I just work too hard and work so long I don't even realize what time it is. And I'll be like, whoops, it's like 10 o'clock. I should probably go home. Like tongue in cheek, meaning, but at the same time saying I'm really committed to this and, I want to be here and I want to do this, not necessarily the overtime, but sort of like a tongue in cheek. And you can do something like that. You know, Another thing about me personally is I never finished my degree. I have a 2-year AA degree, but I never finished my bachelor's degree. And that some companies, they'll really like, they'll say, okay, thank you very much. Other companies will realize that, oh man, I don't have a bachelor's degree, but I have plenty experience. That's another thing that you have to kind of like, don't lie, don't try to hide it. What I've done is I just don't put it on my resume since it's not my selling point, but it's on my LinkedIn. It's on, if you dig, you'll find it. If they ask for it, I'll tell them, but I won't stick it. It's not my, I don't put bachelor's degree on the front of my resume because I don't have it and that's not my selling point. I put 30 years of experience, right? You kind of, as you build your resume, you figure it out. And during the course, the full course, again, we'll have a whole time where we look at resumes and figure out how to build them and dig into all that stuff really deeply. But this is just a high level. Just want to make sure. Okay. Um, yeah, we talked about the coding exercise and the writing live code. Yeah. Oh, it's kind of funny side story about that. I think I didn't tell you this one yet. The first time I ever had to do a live coding exercise was actually when I was interviewing for I think it was the Age of Learning ABC Mouse people, and it was kind of funny because back then it was in-person interviews, and they literally scheduled me for I think it was six half-an-hour interviews, like basically back to back with short breaks in between. But they did everything all at once because we did a phone interview and all that, and then I was meeting the team, I was meeting this, I was meeting the tech, and it's kind of funny because one of the last ones was actually the tech screening, and it was I was going for a senior position, and my future supervisor was there, and also his boss, who was at the time I think he wasn't the vice president, but he was a step down. I think he was a principal something or other engineer, whatever his title was. So it's kind of funny because these two guys come in, and they're totally like messing with me, and I'm exhausted because it's been already like 2.5 hours of interviews, like or whatever it was. It was a long, long day already. And it's funny because they asked me, there's a whiteboard in the room. They walk in, they sit down, they hand me the pen and say, write a function that reverses a string. And I'm like, what? And for a second, I'm like, you mean on the whiteboard? He's like, yeah. I'm like, oh, you want me to write out? He's like, yeah, just write out a function. So it's funny for a second there, I almost froze because I wasn't sure like what to do because I've never written just straight on a whiteboard before. Like, and like I've had chalkboards when I was in school, but it was like a whiteboard. So I had kind of messy writing, but at the same time, I sort of went back to the trick I told you before where I'm talking about the code out loud as I'm writing it, like public, swap string, blah, 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 right? And it's kind of funny. And it was sort of funny because at the end of it, like, the principal guy kind of walked out, but the guy who was my supervisor, like, he sort of had a little bit more to say at the end of it. He's like, he's like, I can tell you're nervous. I can tell you never did this before. He's like, but you really actually nailed it. Your code worked. It was fine. It was just kind of funny to see you sweating. He said, and he walked out. So it's kind of a funny story. But, I don't know if you'll have that experience anymore because a lot of, like, since then, I've never been asked to write on a whiteboard again. It's always been like, code reviews have always been well, it's been remote for me lately. Everything's been remote, and there's always been some IDE that they give you. They have you into this website, enter some information, and you're in a shared screen kind of setting. All right, next screen, please. All right. Oh yeah, here's some really important things too. So when you're going into an interview, like make sure you know like the exact programming language and tool and coding interface tool. Like make sure you know what they're looking for. They usually will say in the interview, and you make sure you know that one. Like if you're applying for a Java job, don't go in there like don't study C# before you go to the Java job, right? I mean, it's sort of obvious, but sometimes you need to do that. You got to make sure you're applying for the right thing and you're studying or reviewing for the right thing. Um, Also, like when you're about to submit code or anything, make sure you carefully check your own code very, very closely. That's a very important thing because it's so easy to have like half written code, and stuff that doesn't work. All right, next slide, please. Okay. Um, this is an example of a fail. Yeah, we talked about big things and little things. So I like to use this example, like sometimes when they ask, like, what's a big fail that you learned in your career? Well, one of them is like with game development. One of the biggest problems that I've seen even today is the concept of scope. Okay. What scope means, it's what kind of game can you deliver and what kind of time frame, right? Like, if we were going to kind of like yesterday, if you were here yesterday, you saw that we made a really simple, very simple 3D thing running around a 3D world, right? Very, very simple. I used primitives in Unity, boom, 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 did it in like, because it's like we have what, a half an hour to do it in, right? So in that half an hour, there's no way I'm going to show you a game like Fortnite. I can't program Fortnite in half an hour. It's not possible. There's too much going in there, right? So one time I was at the smaller studio and they had this big project, right? I wasn't on that direct project, thankfully. I was on a different one, but they hired all these people to do this big project, and the lead engineer was focusing so much on just engine and code theory and code cleanness and stuff like that that they didn't really have a game. They didn't have anything to show the person where he should have been focusing on getting a little bit of aspects of the game up while the engine was being made. It's like it's a scope thing. It's like make sure you know what you need to deliver and when you deliver it, because that project ended up getting pulled because the client didn't see anything. They weren't making the deadlines. They didn't see anything. They just said, "Oh yeah, we're working on it." They're like, "You're working on what? You don't see anything." So make sure you understand, the scope of a game, even when you're designing your own game. Like your first game, 3D game, shouldn't be something like Fortnite because it's going to take you a long time to do. Do something simple. Do something that's, on a flat plane and then add up and down or something like that. Make sure you focus in or you're going to be very discouraged and burned out real quickly. And if you work for somewhere, they're going to demand certain visuals and certain things that you're going to have to deliver. All right, next slide, please. Okay, we could talk about this really quickly. Okay, so you want to find your first job, right? But lots of places they want you to have experience, right? Before they even look at you, right? So what are you going to do? Like, how do you present yourself? This is kind of like, you've heard the term portfolio, you've heard the term demos and stuff like that. Well, it's really helpful to have something like that. If you have little personal projects that they don't have to be all that polished, they don't have to be anything like that. But if you have something you can show somebody, if you don't have, games and things on websites to point out, then do that. And then this last one on the right, real quick story about that. Some places will even request that you make them a sample game, and they usually give you 3 to 5 days to do it. Now, the one place, True Play Games, it was, they actually wanted me to make a sample game. So I gave them a little, asteroids, the old arcade game asteroids, where the stuff flying at you and you're in the center of the screen shooting them. I did one of those games for them, and what I did is I just went on the internet, did some quick searches, and just literally stole images of ships and aliens and asteroids and did that. And the same thing, stole sound effects, stole your assets from the internet. Because if you're going to make all that stuff yourself, it's going to take you so much time. Don't steal code, though. Like, make sure you write the code because that's what they're looking for. But do that. And usually, like I said, they give you 3 to 5 days. So do that. They give you options. Pick the easiest one you think you're going to do. Right? Okay, next slide. I think we're almost done here. Okay, skills you need. Yeah, I think this is one of the last slides. Okay, perfect. Obviously, write down all the languages you know, on your resume. Like you could even have more than one resume for different companies. Some people have done that. I personally haven't done that. I probably should sometimes because they're going to look at your resume for about 5 to 10 seconds, or they're going to have some AI thing look at your resume, so it's going to quickly pull out the buzzwords. Make sure you write down the platforms you've used, like iOS, Android, web, HTML, etc., whatever. Very, very important. Learn some sort of version control or source control system. All right, because on any company, they're going to have this. If you don't know what these systems are or what they do, the biggest one, you can search it online. It's called Git, G-I-T. What these systems do is it takes all the code, sticks it on a server somewhere, and then you as a programmer will come in the morning and you'll do what a poll, which is you'll grab the latest of all the code to your local thing, then you'll make some changes. And when your change is good and compile, you'll push it back to the server and it syncs it with everybody else. So you can have, hundreds of people, if needed, working on a project at the same time. And that server is going to merge and do all the stuff. And it's really important to learn one of those. Some of them, other ones are Git. Like I said, GIT is the most popular one right now. There's Subversion. There's, I think there's, I can't remember the other one. There's different ones, but yeah, there's different ones I used. So that's really important. Learn one of those and stick that on your resume that Git or whichever tool because that's helpful. It really is. I think that's the last slide, so I think I can hand it back to you. Let's go to the next slide just in case. I think, oh, this is another one. Oh, yeah, there's one or two more of these. Okay. Yeah, let me go through this one real quick. I think this is one or two more. They're not numbered on my end. Okay. So, yeah, another thing is the different companies will have different management systems to keep track of deadlines and keep track of tickets and keep track of work. You know, so there's tools like that's the middle one, I guess. There's tools like Azure and Jira. Learn those, look those up online. There's a lot of tutorials. It keeps track of work. There's management system for the flow of how their deadlines work. We talked about Agile or Scrum. That's another one. Those are 2-week sprints. That's what I was talking about. There's something called Kanban, which is like, here's all the tickets. Whoever grabs them first does them. That's an idea. There's something called waterfall, which is like these tickets have to be done before these ones, before these ones. There's all sorts of programming management systems, and the company you apply for is going to use one of them. When you use them, write that on your resume. Um, and the last point, most places I've worked for always tell you to over communicate, which means, don't assume, just say it. Just say it over and over again, even if you sound annoying. Over communicate. All right, next slide. I think, let's see, is that it? I believe that's it. Yes, I will hand it back over to you. Okay, thank you guys.
Thank you, Jonathan. It was really, really useful information, and I think that it will help to a lot of students, a lot of people to find their job of their dream. And so, what's the point to start the career? In the game dev Unity course at Black Screen, you will teach how to make games from scratch. We prepare you for the job interview. We have a career coach who will be working with you and who will help you to build resume, to search the right job, and moreover, you will get a practice in American company, so you will get real experience with us. So we don't just teach you, we make sure you get your first job right after the course. And all our lessons take place live. They are led by real practitioners. So as I mentioned before, too. So let's look at how much do Unity engineers earn. So juniors' salary starts from $100,000 for year. Middle uh, programmers start earning from $150,000 per year. In seniors, you'll see that their salary starts from $200,000 a year. And if you go, for example, if you go through Indeed or other job looking websites, you will find out that GameDev's base average salary in the US is $153,999 per year. Oh, that is really huge. And so you can learn game dev and get an offer with our course from zero to a new profession in 16 weeks. Ideal for adults and teenagers from 15 years old. Everyone learns a new profession together. So what's included, as I mentioned in the beginning of our presentations of our meeting, you will get professional coach support, and you will build your resume. You will get your own job search strategy, and you will get the support like our career coach. He'll support you all the way until you find a job. And let's look again at our timeline of activities. So the course began at March 17. On March 17, you will start your 16-week journey toward a successful career in game dev. So you will participate in live sessions 3 times a week, receiving guidance along the way. So you will be learning and practicing. So you also will get internship. So you will get real work experience for your resume. And you'll improve your online presence and prepare for upcoming job interviews with our career coaching program. And beginner's course GameDev Unity is for adults and for teenagers too. So you will learn the basic of C# programming and the many ways it connects to Unity. You will also create a study foundation in Unity development, granting you the freedom to create any game of your dreams. You will also walk away with 2 projects ready for a personal portfolio. And what kind of games? You will be able to make anything from a casual puzzle game to a multiplayer shooter game to even your own epic RPG adventure with this foundation. You will launch your own game, and what you should know to get a first job uh, will help you with portfolio, background check, references, knowledges and skills, preparing you for the coding interview questions. And we need to choose game dev in Black Screen IT School because all our classes are live. There is no record. There is like today and all this week. You will get 3 live lessons during the week. It's about like 1 hour lessons, and you will get a lot of practice. You will get the best instructors. All of them are like practicing. They're not teaching with us. They're practicing, and they have relevant experience in game dev. And as a result, you will get strong command of C# and its basic constructs. You will understand the principles of game programming, and you will be able to create and customize graphical interface elements like buttons, input fields, lab, and others. And as a result, your user input processing skills and display of results on the screen. You will understand the principles of code organization and structuring, as well as the methodology of development software projects. Unity 3D is one of the most used game engines in the world, so it is also used to create virtual reality. And we all know like how it's popular right now. And you bring your first 2D or 3D game to life. You will shape immersive worlds, deepen your understanding of game elements, harness the power of the game engine, master time control. So you will get all necessary skills to get your job of your dream in IT. And you will breathe life into your game objects with custom behavioral scripts. You'll empower player actions and track their in-game journey. You'll craft an intuitive GUI tailored to user preferences and fine-tune physical interactions to create a realistic or stylized game experience. Launch your game to the world, and I think that is the most exciting part, that you will create your own game by yourself. I think that you can, your dreams from your childhood can come true, and you will create like the game that never, like nobody never done before. And so the course will be 16 weeks. All classes are live. It will be March 17 on Monday, and the cost for the course is $3,999. The program is 16 weeks, and let's also look at the frequently asked questions. Like you can make a screenshot, so you will get all this information and you can read it carefully before start the course with us. And that's what I actually mentioned before, everything like about. And there is also a friendly reminder. We prepared an invitation discount to all our participations of our free lessons, free game dev lessons. So today you will get the special offers. Is the price of the course. It's just $3,299. So you just have like 5 minutes left until this price is still until it's expires. So you'll still have this opportunity, and you also can lock this price if you think that you are into game dev and you feel that it's like you want to find a job in game dev. So we will be happy to help you with this. So you can scan and pay $47 today, this low price. And let's look if you have any questions at the moment. All right, there is no questions. All right, so you can join the course. If you don't have any questions at the moment, you can always left a request on our website, and we will contact you as soon as possible and answer all your questions. All right, thank you for today's meeting.